right, well, welcome everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started. We do have a few more folks coming in, and we will welcome them into our conversation as they join us this afternoon. Thank you to everyone for being here. My name is Judith Rolls, and I am one of the Associate Directors in the Office of Alumni and Family Engagement. I am thrilled to have the opportunity to welcome each of you for this special reunion edition back to school class featuring Katey Zeh from the class of '05. Before we get started, I just want to go over a few Zoom keeping items. You all are likely familiar, but I'll just breeze through these quickly. First, all participants have been muted and will remain muted throughout the event. So we ask that you do so in order to help with any background noise. If you're comfortable and have not already changed your Zoom name to your first and last name, we ask that you do that now. This just helps us know who's on the call. You can rename yourself by clicking the participants button at the bottom of your screen and hovering your mouse over your name and then clicking the more button. And you can feel free to add your Davidson class year as well if you have one. The chat feature will be available. If you have questions for Katey during the Q&A portion of our program, we ask that you send them through the chat to me, Judith Rolls. Katey will not be monitoring the chat. As you can guess, she's going to be focused on her program. And so we ask that you don't send questions directly to her, but if you can send them to me, we will vet them and do our best to answer as many as we can at the end of the program. For optimal viewing, we do recommend you use the speaker view. And so you can again do this by hovering at your mouse at the top of your black screen. And you'll see the word view pop up and you can select speaker or side-by-side speaker view, and you'll be able to see her PowerPoint and Katey in the best way possible. Any tech issues, reach out to me, Judith Rolls, during the program. Happy to assist you. And now for our speaker. So the Reverend Katey Zeh is a strategist, coach, author, and speaker who works with nonprofits and faith communities on organizing for social change. She currently serves as the Chief Executive Officer of the Religious Coalition for Reproductive Choice. She's written for many outlets, including the Huffington Post, Sojourners, Religion News Services, Rewire, and Religion Dispatches, and her advocacy work has been featured in numerous outlets, including CNN, The Washington Post, The Nation, and Vice News. An ordained Baptist minister, Katey is the co-host of the Kindreds podcast and the author of A Women Rise Up, Sacred Stories of Resistance for Today's Revolution with the Far Press, May 2019, a timely take on tenacious women of the Bible. She's working on her second book on abortion, healing, and collective liberation. You can find her at kateyzeh.com and on Twitter, and we will share these with all the folks after the call as well. It is now my pleasure to turn the program over to Katey.
Thank you, Judith. Hey, everybody. I see some familiar names on the list. It would be so much more fun if we were all together in person, but alas, on 2020. So give me a minute. I'm going to share my screen and I'll get our PowerPoint up and running. All right. Everything look good? Okay. So just before we get started, I just want to thank Judith and Bonnie and everybody at the Davidson team for your work and getting this set up and walking me through all the technical side of things and getting all of you here. And I also want to thank my classmates from the class of 2005 for nominating me to be our reunion class speaker. Again, this would have been way more fun to do on campus, but we can still gather virtually and maybe we get to connect with people who would not have been on campus had we been there. So I'm choosing gratitude today. And just thanks to all of you for making time in the middle of a chaotic year, a chaotic season to be here to talk about compassion and how we can build our compassion muscles. So Judith already introduced me. I'm Reverend Katey Zeh. But one thing I didn't include in my bio is that I am also a group fitness certified instructor. And I have not been able to use those muscles since March. So I'm really missing those participants and being in front of folks. And so if you'll indulge me a little bit, I might use some very short exercise analogies just to kind of feed that part of my soul. So we're going to go through today's workout. we'll start with a warm up. So we'll talk about what compassion is. It's a word that we use a lot, but we might not actually know what it means and why focusing on compassion right now is so important. Then we'll move into our strength portion where we'll talk about self-compassion and how we honor our own humanity. Then we'll move into talking about how we build our compassion for others and some of the barriers that often get in the way of feeling compassion for others. And then we'll finish with a stretch. So we're going to do some deepening practices where we're going to go inward so that we can move outward. And we will be doing just some very brief meditation type practices. So if you're somebody who practices meditation a lot, these are probably going to feel very familiar to you. So enjoy just going back to some basics. If you're someone who's like, ugh, I hate meditation, I'm giving you a heads up that that's coming. And I hope that you'll stick with it because you'll probably forget most of what I actually talk about today, right? Like we don't always retain a lot of presentation information, but I'm hoping that by doing just a couple of practices together that we can actually do a little strength exercise and that you'll leave this presentation feeling refreshed and ready to be more compassionate as you go about your day. So that's how we're gonna move. And so let's start with why focusing on compassion. This is a concept that I have been studying and practicing for lots of years now. I call myself the compassionate pragmatist. But this year in particular, I think has really highlighted just how valuable and essential compassion as a virtue and practice is. And I think not to talk too much about COVID-19, but it wouldn't be a 2020 presentation without that. It's shown just how interconnected we all are, which is probably something many of us knew, but we have really felt and experienced in different kinds of ways. And we've also seen how fragile our interlocking systems are. When one piece is disrupted, it impacts all the other parts in these rippling effect ways that we will continue to see over the coming months. So that's looking at it in a negative way, but in a positive way, when we focus on compassion, and compassion is something that can be contagious, it can really give us a helpful focus in these times when we feel like so much is out of control and there's so much uncertainty and so much unknown. And in that chaos, there's so much up in the air, especially when we're not together. We have a tendency to focus really narrowly on our own individual lives or the people who are living in our household. But the practice of compassion can really help us get reconnected and stay more connected with each other in ways that will benefit society as a whole, which I'll talk about a little bit later. So what this year has really asked of us is, what kind of society do we want to be? Can we use this time as an opportunity to dare to imagine something that we have not seen before, but that we believe is possible? And I think that we can. I believe that these small daily practices of compassion, rooted in interconnection and interdependence and mutual care for each other, really can transform the way that we live life together on this planet. So, what exactly is compassion? Because again, this is something that maybe we think we know what it means, but it's actually a more complex concept and practice than what we think. I think sometimes we think of compassion as kind of an emotion, which is part of it, but there's actually these 5 different key elements that you have to go through for it to have compassion. So it's 1, recognizing that another person is suffering. It's having that understanding that everyone suffers. It's part of being human. We have feelings for someone else's suffering, so we're moved by what's going on in their life. And then we deal with the uncomfortable feelings that come up, and we're able to process them in a healthy way, meaning that we can understand that the feelings that come up are for a moment, they're not permanent, that there's something that we can handle, and that they can actually motivate us to the last part of the compassion process, which is feeling compelled to act or alleviate the suffering. And I think that sometimes we get stuck at about stage 3, where we're feeling somebody else is suffering. We feel sorry for them, but we don't know what to do with the feelings that come up, and we kind of get stuck. So we got to move through that all the way to action. And that's why I wanted to talk about for a second how compassion is different from empathy, because I know I've been guilty of this too, of using these 2 terms interchangeably. And they are related, but they're actually different things. And I think it can be really helpful to just spend some time thinking about what they are and how they're connected, but how they're different. It's a really helpful distinction for me because I am a very empathetic person. Empathy comes very naturally to me. It's just how I'm built. It's not a good or a bad thing. It's just what is. And I'm very, very sensitive to other people's emotions. I'm one of those people I can walk into a room and I know if something good just happened or if something bad happened. And so I'm picking up people's moods and emotions very easily, sometimes to my detriment, honestly. So you might be someone who identifies that way if you are very sensitive to people's energy, or you might have no idea what I'm talking about. And that's completely fine when it comes to practicing compassion, because compassion is not only about our feelings. We don't have to be right in the middle of someone else's pain to be compassionate. In fact, empathy without boundaries, kind of like what I was talking about before, can actually be detrimental to compassion because it's exhausting. When we're picking up people's negative emotions and we feel like they're our own, it can be a form of burnout and stress because we're just inundated with the feelings. But when we can have that healthy, separate sense of self, that I understand that you are suffering right now and I have compassion for you, but it's not my own suffering, that's when we can actually move into action. So that's the trick, is to set those healthy boundaries so that you can move into action. And compassion doesn't just end at the emotional state of identifying with someone else's pain. It causes us to want to take action, like I was saying. And the actions have to center the person who is suffering. And I wanted to offer an example I was sharing with Judith and Bonnie before. I was trying to think of something very innocuous. So I hope this works. So let's say you lost your beloved goldfish. I don't know. Some people have attachment to their fish, and you tell me about it, that you're sad that you lost your goldfish. And I recognize that you're suffering, that you're grieving. And I'm also feeling some grief come up for me because I'm thinking about my goldfish that died that I really, really loved. And so I start to merge your pain with my pain, and I start to feel really uncomfortable with the grief that's coming up for me. So then I move to take action. I want to make you feel better. So I'll say something like, your goldfish is in a better place, or you're so lucky to have those 2 days with your goldfish. Or maybe I go out and buy you a new goldfish because that's what I would want. That's what would make me feel better without checking in with you first. So those actions might be really well intended, but it's coming from my own discomfort with the negative feelings that you're having that are triggering a grief response in me. So it's actually not compassionate because the underlying motivation is about lessening my pain, not yours. So that's why we have to go through all of those different 5 steps of compassion. And part of that is having that cognitive understanding that your experience and my experience are different. I can distinguish that you are having a similar experience, but what you need in that moment might look very different from what I would need and what would make me feel better. And because I can put some healthy boundaries around my own grief and my own experience, I can then tend to yours. And the best part about focusing on compassion rather than empathy is that it's something that we can all learn, strengthen, and practice. So we don't have to be naturally empathetic. If you're someone who doesn't pick up on the emotions of other people, it doesn't matter because we can all learn these things through practice. So it's good news, no matter where you're coming from. And if you are an empathetic person like me, you're going to have some very different kinds of challenges for people who are not, and vice versa. But we can all find ways to strengthen our compassion for one another and for ourselves, which is what we are going to talk about next. So let's move on to talking about why we need self-compassion. And I'm starting with this because it's essential. It's not a nice to have. We have to have self-compassion because without it, it's really difficult, if not impossible, to be truly compassionate towards others because we haven't first tended to our own emotional needs. So if you've heard that framing of we can't give what we haven't received or what we haven't gotten, this applies to compassion too. So I had to go back and think about my first month on Davidson's campus, which was August 2001. And knowing all of like my friends and even my professors, I know that for a lot of Davidson folks, we're great at showing compassion for others, but not always tending to our own needs for compassion. So maybe that rings true for you. So when I think back about moving into my dorm room, it's in third little, going to classes, just feeling so out of place. I felt like, why am I here? These classes are so hard. Everyone here is so smart and so accomplished. And I felt like a total fraud. And I didn't have the skills at the time about how to respond to those feelings of that imposter syndrome with compassion. I didn't have it. They weren't skills that I was taught in my family or in my school or in my faith community. So on the left side of the screen, we'll talk about self-criticism. I had a very, very strong inner critic, and I still do. So if you're not familiar with that, that's just the voice inside of us that's often trying to encourage us to, work hard and be successful, but it uses negative self-talk that's usually rooted in fear and even self-hatred. So it's the part of ourselves that we can just never please, that's going to keep telling us that we're not worthy. We can't rest, we can't take a break, we can't fail. We got to keep climbing that ladder of success in the hopes that eventually we'll feel like we've arrived. But there's just absolutely no satisfying the inner critic. And for me, a lot of this stuff got reinforced in the faith community that I grew up in, which really emphasized our brokenness and the parts of us that are unacceptable, without an equal recognition that just by being human and by being created in the divine image, that there was goodness also and divinity within each of us. So my thinking and theological understanding has definitely shifted from growing up in a very conservative evangelical church, but there's still part of me that feels very much rooted in the belief that no matter what I do, I'm not worthy of kindness or acceptance or anything good. So not only does that contribute to a lot of negative self-talk, it also makes me a really judgmental person. I'm just being real here. If I don't have compassion for myself, I'm not going to have compassion for other people who I perceive as failing or not living up to these really unrealistic expectations that I have. So it's detrimental to myself and to the people that I'm in relationship with. And the thing about the inner critic is that we think it's going to motivate us to be better. And it can to a degree, but it actually ends up being a demotivator, because negative self-talk on a constant chain running through our brains is very de-energizing and can actually increase our stress level in the long run. It can, like I said, it can get us to a certain point, but then it becomes counterproductive. And it also creates this negativity bias. So if we're constantly telling ourselves negative things about who we are, we're going to start looking for negative outcomes in our lives. And it's just the truth. It's not like a mystical thing at all. It's actually that we're training our brain to look out for that which is not right. And as we strengthen those muscles, because we're using muscles as the analogy, they're going to get stronger and they're going to get even better at looking for what's going wrong. And it keeps that negativity loop going and going and going. So what self-compassion can do is break down that isolation that we feel when we screw up, that there's something wrong with us because we can't achieve a certain goal. Self-compassion reminds us that we're all human and that we're going to mess up. And it's not an indicator that there's anything wrong with us or broken with us. It's just an opportunity to grow, to show ourselves some kindness, to learn something, and to keep moving forward in our lives. So we have to counteract those inner critic messages with messages of compassion, which can actually calm us down, and they can help us modify our behavior moving forward, because the goal is not perfection, it's growth. So one practice that I like to do is I'll write down the things that I keep beating myself over on a piece of paper, and I'll consciously say to myself, I'm releasing this, and I'll tear it up, or better yet, I'll burn it. And it's this signal to my brain that I'm letting it go. If you've ever heard the Buddhist teaching of the second arrow, the first arrow that strikes us is the one we can't control, but our reaction to it is the second arrow that deepens the wounds. And I think so often our inner critic is that second arrow. So the more we can learn to let it go, to show ourselves compassion when something difficult arises, we're going to ease our own suffering. So if you're brand new to showing yourself self-compassion, it can feel pretty unusual and awkward at first. I had a therapist a long time ago who explained to me, like, the first time that you take a sled down a snowy mountain is really bumpy. because there's no path. But the more you sled down that same path, the smoother and the easier and more automatic it becomes. So the same is true for our self-compassion response. So if you're like me, maybe you have a very smooth path of your inner critic that just glides down that mountain over and over and over again. It's so automatic that you don't even know it's happening. So when we start working those self-compassion muscles, we have to become aware of when the inner critic is getting activated and have messages at the ready to counteract it with something kind and compassionate towards ourselves. Even if it doesn't feel true or it feels awkward, just saying them either sometimes out loud even or in your brain, it'll start creating that new circuitry in your brain over time, and it will become more automatic. So one of the things that I find I get caught up in saying to myself is like, I'm so overwhelmed and I'll never get everything done. Like a very negative place of just, there's nothing I can do about this. And I've trained myself to say in those moments, this feeling is cyclical. You always get done what you need to get done. And it's always true. So maybe there are messages that come up for you during times of great stress that you can find something to counteract that with. And as we're thinking about this, I love this quote from Thich Nhat Hanh, where he talks about compassion. It's like a mother when the baby is crying. She picks up the baby and she holds the baby tenderly in her arms. Your pain, your anxiety is your baby. You have to take care of it. You have to go back to yourself, recognize the suffering in you, embrace the suffering, and you get relief. So we have to see ourselves as babies, like the crying, meaning our pain and our suffering, they're not our fault. You know, we don't typically blame babies when they're crying, even if they are annoying sometimes when they cry, but we recognize that babies cry. And actually, if they don't cry, that there's something wrong. So if we use that analogy for ourselves, we can accept that pain and suffering is just part of being human. And instead of resisting it or wondering why it's happening, we embrace it. That's where we start to get that relief. That's when the pain starts to dissipate because we're acknowledging it and we're honoring it rather than trying to stuff it away. You know, and another distinction that I wanted to make is sometimes we talk about self-compassion and self-care as interchangeable things, and maybe some other time I can do a thing on self-care because that's another term that gets messed up about what it actually means. But they are interconnected, but they're not exactly the same thing. They have distinctions just like compassion and empathy. Self-care, those are the actions that we take to nurture ourselves. So that can be, you know, meditation, yoga, taking a bath, whatever that is for you, journaling. But self-compassion is how we regard ourselves in our mind and in our heart. So it's the cognitive belief that I'm worthy of self-care, that I'm worthy of love and kindness. And so out of that place of self-compassion, I can then take care of myself. So we need both, but they are different things. I hope that that distinction is helpful. So we're not actually going to get into these mantras. We're going to do some things later on, but I thought that I could just share with you a couple of self-compassion mantras that might be helpful. These are things that we can tell ourselves when we're hurting. So, and I got these from a great book if you're interested called Self-Compassion, Stop Beating Yourself Up and Leave Insecurity Behind by Dr. Kristen Neff. It's a great primer on the issue, on the topic of self-compassion. And I think it's, if you're on Amazon, I think it's on Prime Reading. So you might even be able to read it for free right now. So let's just talk through these. And maybe it'd be helpful just to bring to mind something that's happened over the last week that's caused you some minor pain or suffering. Like maybe your apple pie wasn't perfect on Thanksgiving. I don't know. Something small that didn't quite go right. Just so you can have that as you're thinking about this. Maybe it's something more serious than apple pie. I don't know. So we start with mindfulness. This is a moment of suffering. So I'm recognizing that there is suffering happening and that it's happening right now in this present moment and that it's also not permanent. I'm not alone in this experience, so I'm not isolated. This isn't just because I'm a bad person. Many people have suffered. Everyone suffers, that shared humanity piece. And then there's, how am I going to respond to myself? May I hold this pain gently? So I'm expressing kindness to myself. May I give myself love? Again, expressing that kindness. So it's that recognition of what's going on, what am I feeling? recognizing that it's not just about me or something bad that I did. It's a part of being human, and I'm going to respond with compassion, gentleness, and kindness. So the same therapist who gave me that sliding down the snowy hill image, I really should have paid her more because she was really good. She also talked about how difficult it can be for us to care for ourselves when we're suffering emotionally. So she talked to me about, like, if you have a cold, hopefully you know how to take care of yourself. I know many of us like push through colds, but let's just assume that you are sick and you're going to take the day off from work. You're going to stay in your pajamas, you're going to stay in bed, you're going to have someone maybe bring you some hot soup, you get under the covers, you take a hot bath, you drink some hot tea, whatever those things are. Generally speaking, we recognize that when we are physically sick, that is a time to stop and to take care of ourselves. That's not always true when we're having emotional struggles, when we don't have those like sniffles or a fever. But we still need to tend to ourselves in the same way that we would that when we're sick. I need to show myself kindness and care and nurture. And this is going to be very different for every single person. So there's no prescription I can give you. For me, meditation has been really, really important for this. So as yoga, hot baths, sometimes just going to bed early and just calling it a day can be really, really great for self-compassion. Journaling has been important for me. So it's all going to be trial and error for you to figure out what those things are. And if you're starting from scratch, which was where I was probably 10 years ago, one clue might be to think about when you were 8 or 9 years old and you were upset and maybe you went alone somewhere if you had space to, like, were there things that you did that made you feel better? So for me, I was journaling when I was 7 years old. I kept a journal and would write things down. And that has continued to be a practice for me that's been very helpful when I'm just feeling my stuff and I need to go to a place of self-care. Maybe it's something else for you. Maybe you love to draw, or you love to listen to music or make music or dance or whatever it is. It could be anything that helps you reconnect with that part of yourself. So you'll have to do some trial and error, but these mantras can be really helpful wherever you're coming from to just get you in a place of realizing that you're worthy of spending some time taking care of yourself. Okay, so that is self-compassion and why it's important. What is the connection to the collective when we're showing compassion to other people? Why is this so important? And for me, this quote from the Dalai Lama is essential for us to hear and absorb. Love and compassion are necessities, not luxuries. Without them, humanity cannot survive. And I think so often, at least for me, we mistake compassion as this gift that we decide to bestow upon somebody else or not, that it's this voluntary thing. But what the Dalai Lama is saying here is that we actually don't get to opt out of compassion if we want to survive together. So let's dive into why this is so important for our collective survival. So I want to start with, sorry, I'm using 2 computers and sometimes that is just a bad idea. So one of the reasons that my organization started a compassion school, and I'll talk more about that, is we were talking about this hyper individualism that we were seeing in so many ways this year. And so we decided what we needed to do is create a compassion school. So I wanted to talk about some of the attributes of individualism and why it's actually detrimental to both our own well-being and our collective well-being. So we start with this core belief, which is I'm all I have. It's just me against the world. And there are some really challenging beliefs that undergird this worldview. So we start with disconnection, believing our life is our own, has nothing to do with anybody else. I'm exaggerating these, but you get what I'm saying. We also blame ourselves. So if we fail, it's our fault. And if we succeed, it's our own doing. That's connected to the blame piece. There's also the belief in scarcity, that there's not enough for everybody. And so I have to make sure that I get my piece of the pie or I'm not going to get it. And related to that is fear of the other, because we're disconnected from other people. When we perceive someone as different, then they're a threat because we're fearful of what they might take from us, which contributes to the scarcity mindset. So ultimately, the core belief is that survival is on me. It's hyper competitive, winner take all mentality, not useful at all. So if we stay in this individualistic place, we can perceive compassion as a weakness or being naive or giving people something that they don't deserve. We don't see compassion as a strength and a virtue that actually works to build healthy and thriving communities in which we all have what we need. So I wanted to show this video because I think it turns the idea of compassion on its head. It's only a couple of minutes long. If you can't hear it, there are subtitles, so hopefully you can read along if you can't hear it. And I'll recap some of the main themes afterwards. So I'm going to put my volume up.
Someone killing somebody else or someone being the cause of war, should we be compassionate, and can we be compassionate towards such an individual? I think you're looking at it from a very resultant state. Can we be compassionate? I don't think it will be easy to have compassion without bias, even ordinary compassion, if it doesn't really begin a little bit before. You have to work with the causal factors. And that's so beautifully explained in the Mayan teachings, is that until you really understand you are the recipient of a lot of kindness from the others, until you understand the interrelationship with the others, until you really understand the whole concept in Buddhist teaching is about mother-like sentient beings. And that's not just poetic. It's not just there to make it sound sort of emotional and poetic. It is really very, very true, is that the birth of any attitude of kindness and compassion is always born from a sense of that recognition of how much you are at the receiving end of others' kindness and compassion, whether mother or anyone else. So even when you drink a cup of tea, if you don't really look at the larger picture of how many contributing, individuals have gone into making that moment possible, then, when you ignore that fact, then you begin to develop a very individualistic, hardened island kind of a mind of your own. That's what makes, compassion and the practice of compassion difficult, is because we think we are an individual, unattached, and not sort of in any way related or connected to the others. But when the connectedness and the interdependency of ourselves with everyone else, the larger picture of that codependency is understood, then I think you come to a point in your mind where you can then say, you're the one receiving so much. The least you could do is say thank you. And how best would you repay that? And that makes compassion sort of the least thing that you could do, each day, if you were someone who understood what you got from the others. Without that kind of an understanding, then the whole sort of the patronizing attitude, I'm the good one who's giving always the compassion, not getting anything in return, that kind of doubt can easily come. And someone killing somebody else, or someone being the cause of...
I think we saw it once, we're good. But I love this video because it really shifts the idea of compassion from something that we decide whether or not we're willing to give out of the kindness of our heart, to compassion as a response to being on the receiving end of many, many kindnesses in our lives. And if we think about all of the people and processes required to have our lives the way that they are, from a small thing like drinking a cup of tea, we begin to see how we're the recipient of so much. And I do occasionally drink tea, but I'm more of a coffee drinker. So if I think about the farmers who grew the coffee, the people who harvested it, got it into the container, shipped it here, put it on the store shelves, and provided it for me at a relatively low cost, then I'm so grateful for the gift of this coffee, that without which many people's labor I never would have enjoyed. And I think it helps us get out of a very transactional way of thinking about our lives into that interdependency and interconnection place. So with the tools like that video and ways of thinking, we can move into a collectivism mindset, and we adopt a new set of values that guide our individual and collective way of being with each other. So we start thinking about being in solidarity, that we're in this together, and what happens to the most vulnerable impacts everyone. And if we can protect the most vulnerable, that means everybody's protected and cared for. We also gain support because we realize that our success is shared. So even if I'm not the one to be successful at something, if I'm the recipient of the other person's success, then I have what I need too. I'm thinking about all of these scientists who are working on COVID-19 vaccines. I'm not doing that work, but I'm going to eventually be the recipient. I will be so grateful. There's also an abundance mindset that there's enough for everyone if we're generous and less fear-based in the way that we distribute resources. And we begin to embrace one another because we see that differences are really assets and not threats, and that our survival is in fact collective. So that's all well and good. It's very cognitive. But what happens when we encounter someone or a group of people that challenges our ideals about being in this together? So we all have people in our lives who are challenges when it comes to being compassionate. I know for me, I would rather just be judgmental in those cases, but that ends up hurting me too. So what are the things that we can do, again, to strengthen those compassion muscles and get ourselves ready to show kindness and understanding to other people in our life? Probably none of these will be new to you, but sometimes we have to return to the basics that are much harder to implement than to know. So there's the practice of mindfulness, being aware of what we're feeling, how we're showing up in our bodies and in our thoughts, and accepting what comes up without giving our feelings too much power, recognizing that they're there for a moment and that our fears don't have to direct our action, which I think is so much of what's behind that hyper-individualism. There's the practice of gratitude. Remember, I was talking about the inner critic always scanning for what's wrong. The practice of gratitude helps us scan for what's good. And we can reflect on that exercise of a cup of tea or whatever it is for you and be thankful for being on the receiving end of other people's kindnesses. And then that practice of gratitude will call us to respond to others with kindness and grow that gratitude in our lives. And the last practice is loving kindness, which is a form of Buddhist meditation that maybe you've tried before. We're going to do a little bit of that in a couple of minutes. So we can offer loving kindness to ourselves, but we can also offer it to people we love easily, people we feel neutral about, and even people we have conflict with, which can be challenging, but really, really helpful to deal with within the confines of our own hearts and minds before we have to deal with them in real life. So we're going to move into our final part of the presentation, which is the practice part, because I've just been doing a lot of talking. And so I'm going to do two just very brief, I'm looking at the time, we have time for this, two very brief practices. One is going to be self-compassion, and the other is going to be a loving kindness for other people. So I'll talk you through it, and then we'll do it for just about a minute or so together. And if you're someone who would rather turn your camera off, this is the great thing about being virtual. We don't have to all be awkwardly closing our eyes in the same room. So if you want to turn off your camera, get comfy wherever you are and can hear this, I welcome you and invite you to do that. So we're going to do a breath practice. So we're going to be mindful of the breath, and then I will lead us through it. You can say these words to yourself internally. On the inhale, I am enough. And on the exhale, I am not all things. This is one that I've been practicing for a long time, especially when I'm feeling like I'm overwhelmed, I can't do anything right, and so many people are expecting me to do things for them. So it's that recognition that as I am, I'm enough. I'm worthy of compassion and love, and that I can't be everything all the time. So let's practice this together. If you want to get into a comfortable seat with your spine nice and tall, or you can even lay on the floor if that's better for you. Again, you're at home or in your office, you can do whatever works best. And if it's comfortable for you to close your eyes, feel free to do that. You can also just keep a very soft gaze if that works better for you. And preferably have your feet on the floor or on a surface where you can feel that groundedness. And I'm just going to give you a minute to settle in and recognize how you're feeling right now. If there's an emotion or a sensation that's present for you. And then we're just going to start paying attention to that inhale and exhale. You don't need to change your breathing, just natural breath. It can be in through the nose and out through the mouth, whatever is comfortable for you. So on your next inhale, I am enough. Exhale, I am not all things. Inhale, I am enough. Exhale, I am not all things. Inhale, I am enough. Exhale, I am not all things. And I'll give you just a minute to practice that at your own pace on the inhale and exhale. I am enough, I am not all things. And if your mind wanders, that's okay. Just come back to the breath. And after your next round of inhale and exhale, feel free to open up your eyes and come back into this space. I know that that was very short, but maybe gave you just a little bit of a taste of a self-compassion mantra that you can try in your own time. So for our last practice, we're going to do loving kindness. Now, if you would like to offer loving kindness to yourself, that is completely fine. More self-compassion is always good, but it can also be helpful to picture someone in your life, and I'll give you some options here. So we can choose somebody who is easy to love. Maybe it's your child or a friend. We can pick someone to bring to mind who you feel sort of neutral about. Maybe it's a neighbor you don't really know, but you see. Or we can pick someone who has given us some challenges in our lives. Maybe somebody you've had a recent conflict with, maybe over Thanksgiving. And so I'm going to let you pick, as you're thinking, just someone. And usually the first person who comes to mind, just go with that. Don't overthink it. And we're going to bring them to mind like they're sitting right in front of us. And then we're going to offer them some loving kindness through these words. So we're going to offer them happiness. May you be happy. Relief. May you be free of suffering. Health. May you be healthy. And peace. May you be at peace. So if you've got that person in mind, again, the first person who comes to mind is probably the best. We'll get back into that relaxed posture. We'll breathe for a minute, and then I will bring these words of loving kindness that will repeat internally. So go ahead and find that comfortable seat again. Nice tall spine, feet on the floor, feeling grounded, paying attention again to that breath. Maybe it's a little easier to get into it this time. And you're going to picture this person as if they were right in front of you right now, in the room with you. I will say the phrase and then you'll repeat it internally, offering them to the person in our minds. May you be happy. May you be happy. May you be free of suffering. May you be free of suffering. May you be healthy. May you be healthy. May you be at peace. May you be at peace. And with your eyes still closed, maybe just pay attention to what it feels like to offer this person loving kindness. It might feel good. It might feel challenging. Maybe it doesn't feel one way or another. All of that is completely fine. But just notice what comes up, maybe feelings that come up or thoughts. And we're going to let that image of that person go. One more inhale and exhale. And when you're ready, open up your eyes and come back into the room you were in. So I'm going to wrap up, but if you want to share in the chat box, if you feel like it, just what either of those were like for you, would be curious to know. And I wanted to end with this quote to wrap it up. Compassion is contagious. Every moment we choose compassion, we move towards a better world. And as we've talked about, compassion really is an inside job and an outside job. It's about going inward and oftentimes doing the work of giving ourselves the compassion that we deserve and maybe we never got. And in doing that work, we are then able to respond compassionately to the people in our lives and the people we don't even know or don't interact with. So if you're having trouble with this, if you're resisting it, that's normal and fine. I would just start by exploring, why are you deserving of compassion? And if that's a hard starting place, begin by asking why you think you're not. And my guess is it has something to do with your inner critic. When something happens when you have a less than compassionate response, which that happened to me this morning, rather than letting the inner critic take over, take a step back, show yourself compassion for being human, and then think about what happened. How could it be different in the future? And I really do believe that grounding our lives and our actions in compassion will create a profound shift in our own lives and then in society as a whole. And I hope you believe so too. So just as we're wrapping up, if you're interested in this topic and want more, my organization has a completely free compassion school. It's a virtual course. It's very bite-sized with videos, links, text to absorb and think about, homework, if you're someone who likes homework. And you can go to rcrc.org/compassion school. And again, these slides will come to you later on if you want to check it out. And I just want to say thank you again. You'll get all of this information, but just wanted to put up my email, website, my podcast, Kindreds, and where you can find me on all the socials. And also just want to give gratitude for this great company called SlidesGo that creates these wonderful free templates. So if you're putting together PowerPoint and need a template, they were kind enough to let me borrow this one. So I will stop there and invite you to ask questions. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. Again, you'll get this information, but I want to be able to see all your beautiful faces. Okay.
Great. Well, again, Katey, thank you so very much. I'm hoping I'm speaking accurately for those on the call when I share gratitude for all that you've shared with us this afternoon. At this time, Katey will entertain some questions, and so I'm starting to get some through the chat. So just a reminder, if you have questions for Katey, feel free to send them to me, Judith Rolls, in the chat, and we're going to get to as many as we can. And as Katey also mentioned, if you have any reflections that you'd like to share for all of us to read, share them with everyone, or if you just want to share them with us to read out loud, we're happy to do so as well. So Katey, I'm going to go ahead and start with a question that I got, and we'll kind of go from there.
Okay, sounds good.
So this person says, thank you for being so open about your own journey around compassion. Your comment about reinforcing the nature of self-criticism made me wonder about the connection between the critical perspectives we teach in the liberal arts education. Can or should the mind and heart behave separately around criticism?
That's a really interesting thought. And one thing that I learned after I got out of college from a theologian was that it takes just as much wisdom and intelligence and analysis to appreciate that which is good and beautiful that we like, as it does to critique things that we don't. And I do think, not particular to Davidson, but there is kind of a cultural emphasis on deconstruction or critique and what's wrong with something. And we're very good at that, but we don't always practice how to appreciate something and bring that same level of care and concern. So I think we do that to one another, to ourselves, and to the learning that we do. So I would just offer that, if you're someone who works with students, how do you teach them to be able to articulate and appreciate what they love about a book or a piece of writing or a piece of art? I hope that's helpful. You should also be able to do that about yourself too, what you appreciate about yourself.
Thank you. Katey, you should know lots of grateful words of appreciation coming through the chat for you, mentioning that all your tools in particular and during these times are very helpful. A question that we did get was, do you have any particular recommendations for how to help teenagers develop compassion?
Oh, that's good. Yeah. So I have a 6-year-old. She's not quite a teenager yet, but I think about parenting, and what's challenging about being a teenager in particular, I think, is that there is a hyper focus on self and separating self from others, which is a healthy part of development. So I wonder if a practice for teens, or really anybody who's struggling with compassion, is to start with, who are the people in your life already that you have an easy time feeling compassionate for? So maybe that's a friend, or goodness, it could even be someone on a TV show, right? Like that evokes that emotion of feeling with somebody, and really start with, where do you already feel compassion? Because I feel like from there, it can grow towards the people who are a bit more challenging. And again, I think looking back at myself as a teenager, like that inner critic was really, really strong. And I wasn't getting those tools of how to show compassion to myself. And it felt like the stakes were so high at every decision point, every test I took. So I think, really modeling that self-compassion for you, if you're a parent or a teacher, and then really trying to share some of these tools with the team so that they can start building that for themselves. Because again, I don't think you can give what you haven't received. So again, starting with building those self-compassion practices and mantras and ways of being, and then starting with, where is it easy for you to feel compassion, and going from there. So don't start with the hardest thing, start with the easy thing and build from there. That's probably true for adults too.
And in the chat, I'm seeing, and we will share, somebody shared a link for a workbook that a UNC professor wrote about teens on self-compassion. And so we'd be happy to share that link. Also getting a lot of questions about if this presentation will be shared. Yes, we will share the presentation, and both the recording of it and Katey's PowerPoint following this call. So just for all those, we're getting lots of questions about that. Katey, apparently lots of folks want to share this out. So
yeah, I already sent it to Judith, so it's ready to go with that follow-up email.
Absolutely. Lots more questions. I just also wanted to share some of the comments. It says, someone said compassion practice also feels like a forgiveness practice. I don't know if you've heard that before, but when one of the folks on the call was grateful to share that with us. Then another question came in, another comment came in that they enjoyed the self-critique discussion, and that the tools, again, lots of comments about your tools have been very helpful. Someone says, I'm also curious about how compassion relates to kindness and engaging, not only with suffering in others, but their happiness as well.
Yeah, that's good. I think kindness and compassion and justice are all interconnected. And I didn't talk about justice so much today, but that's very much the focus of our organizational conversation. Like, how can we be compassionate and just at the same time? And I think kindness is in the delivery, and I think kindness without compassion can sometimes be counterproductive. If it's only coming from a kind place that's not informed by the person to whom you're trying to show compassion, that it can sometimes be misguided. So I think the delivery is very important. And when we talk about justice work, sometimes the way that justice movements work is not compassionate. And that it's actually reinforcing the kinds of beliefs and systems that we say we want to reform. So I think it's important to hold all three of those pieces together. Like, I want to deliver what I'm saying and doing for you in a kind way. I want it to be rooted in your particular experience and needs, what you're telling me. And I also want to do it in a systemic way so that the next person doesn't suffer the thing that you're suffering from.
Thank you. With that, coming to our time, so I'm gonna see if I can fit in these last one or two questions. But I have someone who says, I work with a community outreach committee at my church that's begun to face some resistance from members of the congregation who think we're getting too political or partisan. Suggestions about how and where to start in addressing these challenges.
You said this is someone's church?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I would say Jesus was politically active. And I think that opting out of politics or opting out of conversations that impact systems and people who are marginalized is coming from a place of great privilege that it doesn't impact you. I think that there are ways to engage political conversations that are rooted in the virtues of compassion and justice, but I think opting out is not very biblical. So I think that I wouldn't start with that at your church. I'm just giving you that context. But I think a question to ask, especially for outreach that might be more charity focused, as in meeting immediate needs, is to start asking the question, why does this need exist? What created it? Why do we need to be doing whatever it is? If it's making meals, if it's doing a diaper drive, I don't know what that looks like, but really asking what caused the inequity that requires the church to step in and fill that gap. And sometimes that can be a very challenging conversation to have, but it will get to the underlying beliefs about why you do what you do. And from there, you can have that conversation about justice along with charity, which to me is really what compassion is. I hope that's helpful. I'm happy to follow up with whoever asked that. If you want to email me, I'd be happy to get into more detail about that, because that's a very big question. But thank you for raising it.
And I can share the chat with you, Katey, so you know who asked which questions as well. Mm-hmm. So, well, we're hitting our time, and I am sorry, we've so many more questions. I think we could probably be here for another hour, which really hits home that your discussion was just what I think people needed today, Katey. So thank you very much for that. And I see lots of head shaking, so thank you. Really do wanna thank you for being here and taking the time to be with all of us today and leading us in this really important conversation. I do also want to extend a big thank you to the class of 2005 Reunion Committee for sponsoring this event and for putting Katey on our spotlight. So thank you so much. We again are grateful for everyone who joined us this afternoon. We will follow up with all the things we promised, with the presentation and the recording, and Katey's information. It sounds like she's willing to talk to some folks individually, so we'll be happy to reshare that information as well. And really just want to say thank you. And Katey, do you have any parting words before we wish everyone the rest of their day?
No, just sending lots of love and gratitude to all of you. And I hope that if nothing else, you got a moment to just take care of yourself. And I look forward to staying in touch with many of you. Please do send me an email or follow me on Twitter. We'd love to talk more about this topic.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Katey, and everyone. We hope you enjoy the rest of your day. Have a great afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you.